much. I'm Ren. This has just been an awesome experience coming here. This is my first major public speaking event. It's the first VeganFest I've ever been to, and just to be around this and see how things are changing, especially for a kid that grew up in Texas and spent most of my life there, this is really exciting. And to have a platform like this to share my story and what I've learned, because I don't come from the vegan side of things. 5 years ago, I lived a very different life. I cared about animals as much as I thought I did. I would have told you I loved my horses, my dogs deeply, the way everyone does, but I was one of those crazy animal lovers that needs those animals to feel okay in the world. And the shift that I experienced changed all that, and it exposed something that a lot of vegans aren't aware of yet. And that's the subtlest, most basic form of exploitation we do, which is domestication in general. Not that we shouldn't have pets necessarily, but the fact that we create beings to be controlled for our own benefit is the root cause of the problems that we're seeing. So a lot of the rescue efforts and the sanctuary efforts, while they're doing a great job treating symptoms, the work that this has led me to is to treat the cause of all of this, which is, why are we bringing a being into our life so that we can feel okay and feel a sense of unconditional love, rather than find that within ourselves? And what did we miss in our early childhood that keeps us seeking that in our personal relationships, in our dogs, in our cats? I come from the horse world, so I was seeking a sense of power and control in my life. I come from a really rough background. If you read my book, you'll understand that I grew up with a really rough childhood and sought horses out as my sense of sanity and freedom in the world. And that really helped me. Horses were my coping mechanism as I was growing up. It's how I survived. It's how I became successful. It's how I gained my confidence. But what it led me to was a really arrogant way of living, and I lived in my ego. My personal relationships weren't as deeply connected and fulfilling as I wanted them to be. They didn't always work out the way that I wanted them to, and I was constantly trying to get this need of acceptance met outside of myself. My story goes a little like this. I started out in Texas buying and training and selling horses. So when I went to college, whereas most people spend their weekends at college parties, I was at the stockyards filling up a trailer full of horses so that I could take them home, train them, rehabilitate them, and then sell them for money. I was a horse flipper, I guess you could say. So I would buy pretty horses for next to nothing, take them home, train them, and then sell them for twice as much as what I paid. And that's how I paid my way through college, and it was a really good career for me, and it made a good name for myself in Texas. The problem was I wanted to be really successful, and I wanted to make a lot of money, so I followed the path of the natural horsemanship movement, and then into the more esoteric forms of horsemanship. I'll let that pass. You hear of Horse People Day, dancing with horses, and there's this new movement called liberty training, which is about training the horse in absolute freedom, which is a total crock. I mean, there's nothing free about being a domesticated being in the control of a human being. So what we do is just subtly manipulate the circumstances, the environment. We use positive reinforcement. We may use treats that are laden with sugar that are totally unnatural to their dietary biology. And we do subtle things of manipulation and control, and then we call that love and connection and respect and honoring, and then we market it and we sell it because that's what everybody's looking for. Is how do we get more love in our lives? How do we be seen? How do we be heard? How do we get accepted? And we're perpetuating this nonsense of codependency through training others to give us a sense of what we have lost in ourselves. So as going through this path, I tried all of that stuff. I was invited to Costa Rica to work with liberty trainers, and I got to ride this amazing white horse up and down the beaches and in the mountains with no equipment on it whatsoever. It was my dream come true. And as far as I was concerned, that was the epitome of what it was as a horse trainer, is to be able to take a horse that you have no history with, get on its back, go out into the wild, and do whatever you wanted to with. Up until that point, that was probably the greatest day of my life. I got home from that trip, and I had just joined a very esoteric form of horsemanship called Nepserov Okol out of Russia. And so I was questioning things deeply. And in this school, they use no forms of control, no equipment, no treats, no positive reinforcement. The only reinforcement you have is your emotional connection to the animal. There's just relationship. And so it had gotten me questioning a lot of things, and they don't ride. And I was really resistant to joining that school because I was like, hell, if I'm going to go through all of this in my life, become this famous trainer, and then not ride my horse. Well, I started looking at the pictures of the ride that I took in Costa Rica, and I saw my face in the pictures and how much joy I had on the back of that white horse with no equipment, running up and down these beaches in the water, every little girl's dream come true. And then I looked at the horse. It was not her experience. I mean, she was compliant, she was cooperative, we had a great ride, but it was either a blank expression, sometimes her ears were forward, most of the time they weren't. And I could just see a huge disconnect between what I was doing and what she was experiencing. And I had trained hundreds and hundreds of horses, so I wasn't that far from being able to see the truth of the matter. But then I went and rescued an essentially wild stallion. He wasn't a Mustang, he was an Arabian, but he had very little human interaction, and he was aggressive and dangerous. And I took him on and attempted to apply this work from this Russian school, which essentially had 3 basic rules. The horse is always right, which in my interpretation of that is given everyone's unique perspective and background and experiences, they're operating in a way that's essentially congruent to their belief system and appropriate for them. So to make them wrong is to create conflict. So I wasn't allowed to make him wrong for anything. I had to learn how to set boundaries appropriately, maintain my composure in all situations, even if I got bit, kicked, or anything else like that. I had to take responsibility for my decision as a human to enter his space. That was a huge difference than what I was used to as a professional trainer. I also could never make him wrong. So, never making him wrong, I could do him no harm. I could never do anything to hurt him. So there was no punishment, none whatsoever. I could use no equipment. And I had to know the science inside and out so that I knew if I was causing harm in and amongst all of that. Luckily, I was a holistic horse care specialist, so I had a very extensive background in horse biology and how their systems operate. Well, when you're left with none of that, all that's left is you and the horse and trying things out. And it was really hard at first to move away from all of my conditioning patterns and reinforcement methods and even like body language. A very subtle shift of my hips used to be able to send a horse in a different direction. I wasn't allowed to do any of that with this method. And yet here was this stallion with no previous training cooperating with me and doing everything that I asked as long as I never made him wrong and I was willing to walk away every time I judged him. Well, that was great, and things were happening in our relationship that I couldn't explain. I couldn't explain how this animal was working with me, how he could understand the things I was teaching him. I taught him shapes and colors in less than 15 minutes, the way that you would teach a 5-year-old human child, and he got it. It blew my mind. It shattered my reality. And here I am with my personal life falling apart around me, my human relationships never working out the way that I wanted them to, never being able to find a partner that could really understand what I needed, and I could never get my needs met with them. And this horse was showing me day in and day out that the less I tried to control another, the more they wanted to be in relationship with me. We'll get to that. I'm going to speak for 20 or 30 minutes, and then I'll take questions, and then I'll sign books if you guys are interested. But I'm just going to give you a little background of how I came to these conclusions, and the whole story is in the book. But there was a moment where my personal life at home was falling apart around me. I was already starting to get weird looks from the people in my area because I was a really successful, well-known trainer in Texas, and I stopped riding because of this. Suddenly, I had this like film reel of all the horses that had told me no in this 20-year career as a horse trainer, and it was just devastating. It was like we never, ever pay attention to their no, much less their subtlest no, which cannot be recognized from their back. It's impossible to see the first no a horse gives you from the back of them because it's so small that you can't see it. A lot of times it's just an ignoring of an intention rather than a buck or a kick, which comes like 100 no's later. And when I do workshops, I demonstrate this with whatever horses because it's very easy to demonstrate what a no looks like, and the audience is usually about 10 no's off from the first one. And it just becomes very clear. That's exploitation. The second that we ignore another being's non-request to work with us, we've now overstepped our boundaries. But more than that, beings in our care that depend on us for their basic needs are not in a position to offer the use of their bodies. And there's a strong parallel to children here that I won't go too deeply into because no one likes that and it makes everyone uncomfortable. But coming from that history myself, I see it very clearly. And because I have experience in that area as a child of abuse, it's very obvious to me that that's what we do with
horses especially, but most animals, we use the animal to derive an emotional need that is not their responsibility to give us. And that is where exploitation begins, and that is the very nature of domestication. Domestication in and of itself is creating or controlling another to benefit from. That is exploitation. So as long as we are perpetuating this idea of domestication, and we do it with other human beings, most of us, myself included, either are domesticated or have been by society, other humans, our personal relationships, our family, our spouse. Anyone that tries to control you or manipulate you to derive their own emotional needs from you is domesticating you in some way, trying to control you to benefit from you. So when we don't look at that, and we focus just on the extreme forms of exploitation like eating and wearing animals, we're missing the root cause of the problem. It takes both, and we've got to pay attention to both. And as a horse trainer, that world's just rampant in it. I mean, there's literally no way I have found to climb on the back of a horse and make it okay when this is a being that depends on you for its basic needs. So the responsibility is ours to not use them in that way, because as our children, essentially, because we're responsible for their food and their shelter and their water and their well-being, they're not really in a position to say no, even when they can. So even if we love them tremendously with a lot of affection and admiration, it's too easy to build trust and relationship with those that depend on you for their basic care, to put them in a position to tell you when it is and isn't okay to use them or to climb on top of them. And since there's no scientific benefit to climbing on top of a horse, there's really no reason to do it. And no horse that I've met that has never been conditioned to be ridden has ever said yes to being, well, they'll say yes, but no horse in freedom has ever come up to me and said, hey, why don't you climb up on me and let's go for a ride, just because I know you'll like it a lot. Now, if you build trust and relationship, sure, that can happen in a training setting. With all the horses I've trained, I've had many instances where very kindly trained horses have come to me and shown me their back, and it felt like an invitation. And in their limited perception of what reality is, it was a true invitation. They meant it. They didn't mind. But what I do is undomesticate the animals in my life. So how we do that is we create a relationship that removes all forms of exploitation. The only things that I control in the animals' lives now are their basic needs and things that I'm responsible for, like making sure that they're safe, making sure that they are not going to harm each other, things that are my responsibility as their guardian. Outside of that, they're free to have their own choices. I set my own boundaries. I stay autonomously within my power, and I let them do the same. And in that dynamic, amazing stuff happens. I can only describe it as magic, and I don't know how to put words to it because it's experiential. Because if we knew what was possible with other animals, and I'll touch back on teaching that horse shapes and colors, we wouldn't do with them what we do. They are brilliant, just like humans can be brilliant when they're not limited. We limit their potential just in our day-to-day conditioning and interactions of, I'm in control of your life, I control your every move, I control what you eat, I control where you eat. Just subtle things like that take them out of their power. And you learn that when we stop doing that and we stop micromanaging them so much, and we learn to listen. I don't like ever saying animals are voiceless, because they're not at all. They very much have an energetic language beyond words that we have lost track of. We rely too much on our intellectual wording and not enough in our body and feeling. And through feeling, you can interpret so much from another that is lost in translation when we try to put it into language. Animals are very clear about what they do like and what they don't like. We just don't listen, because that's not why we bring animals into our lives. We bring animals into our lives usually to serve some purpose for us until we pass the point to where we want to become in service to them. We don't even raise children to be in service to children for the most part, at least not in this paradigm. So the work I do is about undomesticating your life by starting with the domestic beings and the dependent beings that are most essentially in your care. If we start with the most fundamental things that we can control, ourselves and those that we are in control of, we start to learn the opportunity to practice a way of relating to one another that we can now take out and try with other adult consenting human beings. We use animals in therapy all the time. My question to that is, why are we using animals for something that we are completely capable of offering to each other? Why aren't we helping one another? And what is keeping us from becoming the kind of human beings that want to help one another and live in community that way? It's much easier to grab an animal and teach them how to be in service to another human being. It's our job to become that source of unconditional love. And the only way that we do that is through radical self-acceptance and self-love. So I'm not one of the advocates that gets up and says anyone's right or wrong. I've done everything under the sun exploitative and harmful to animals. I was conditioned to do that. I understand that. I meet it with compassion. I spent 30 years of my life in Texas. I have no regrets about what I did or didn't do. It made sense. I totally get it where I came from. If I were to look back on all the things that I did and spend the rest of my life wallowing in self-pity and guilt, I wouldn't be up here talking to you today. So the idea behind this is to accept who we are, where we come from, understand our parents' limitations, and then on the grander scale, humanity is evolving towards this again. I want to say again because I think that this is our true nature and where we come from, but we've added so many layers of distraction and things keeping us from it that we've forgotten. If you remove all forms of distraction from the animals in your lives and start relating to them on this level, you will feel it again. You'll remember who you are because they will start modeling it. They will start modeling who they really are beyond the conditioning process and beyond the learned helplessness. And when the animal stands in front of you in the true essence of who we really are, you feel it. You feel it in you. You see their presence. You feel their presence. You remember what it's like to be at peace and not living in the future and stressing about things. You remember that it's okay to just be and not have some purpose that is assigned to you by society and someone else's ideals. We have forgotten that how to think for ourselves. That's why, I mean, how many people wouldn't be vegan if they actually had to go through the whole process themselves? If they had to raise the animal, kill the animal, and then eat the animal. That would eliminate a whole lot of meat and dairy eating right there. So we forgot to think for ourselves, and we've forgotten how to feel. Because if we really think about the fact that we're consuming the flesh or the excretions of another, I don't know very many human beings that sits really well with. But we're listening to everyone around us because we're so disconnected and so distracted. And if we have animals in our lives, we have a daily perpetuation of the idea that it's okay to get our emotional needs met outside of ourselves. So even these great spiritual teachers out there that have these incredibly grand concepts that have helped me tremendously in my life, I go meet them and I spend time with them and I look at their plate and I'm like, wait a minute, what's the deal? Like, why are you eating another animal after we just spoke to the interconnection of all life? And that we need to have compassion and reverence for all life, and there's just no reason for it. And so that's what my work's about. It's the subtle, insidious, exploitive things that I believe are the root cause of a lot of the problems that we're seeing that we're now trying to desperately treat the symptoms of before we destroy ourselves and the planet. I've created a foundation. I'm creating a global network of like-minded spaces that want to help animals live at this level of relationship. And so I travel around a lot. The U.S. isn't really open to my ideas just yet, but I do travel as much as I possibly can because I had to leave everything. When this shift happened with me, I'll tell you that story. I was working with the stallion I mentioned. Everything was falling apart around me in my personal life. I was really desperate. All of these new ideas were really overwhelming to me. People were starting to think I was crazy. I had stopped riding. I couldn't train horses anymore. I was still doing hoof care, but it was getting harder because at this point my animals had changed so much that I could just go out with my tools and ask them if I could trim them and they would just comply. And then I would go to a traditional barn setting and the horse would be really uncomfortable or be moving around, or he could feel that I could feel him, and then he'd start acting up and the owner would want me to train him, and it had just left me. I had a moment working with my stallion where I was just overwhelmed with all of it, and he started getting really aggressive with me, and I couldn't control him and I couldn't make him wrong, and he's rearing up and bouncing around, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna get killed, and all of this is gonna be for nothing. And in a moment I broke down and just felt everything I was actually feeling and started crying, and he immediately came back to the ground, walked over to me, placed his head on my chest, and I just lost my shit. And he just stood there and held space for me while I was a complete wreck, a complete mess, hating myself in every way for everything imaginable. And I felt in that moment, wow, someone can actually love me for all of me. I'm actually not too much for somebody. And he also showed me that that's why I wasn't receiving that in my life, because I wasn't loving anyone to that level either, because I didn't know how. None of us know how. This is what we seek our whole lives, is how do we accept ourselves so fully that we can look at another and not judge a single thing that they do and meet them with compassion and understanding. And instead of pointing fingers and blaming, we just accept 100% responsibility for what we need, who we are, and we learn how to express it in a way that doesn't make anyone wrong. And that's where real change happens. When you can do that for another, it's really easy for them to get out of their own way and make conscious, loving decisions. But as vegans, we tend to go out and make people wrong for their choices because we are uncomfortable with the suffering that animals experience. I've got so much animal experience. I've seen animals suffer greatly. I've caused great suffering in animals. And I can tell you one thing, they do not suffer the way that we do. They suffer the same pain, they feel the same emotions, but they do not suffer from the same insanity that is human to create stories around their life. They don't live in the future, they don't live in the past. So their suffering is different in that it's not as intellectually suffocating as ours. They experience raw emotion, which we are devoid of. We stuff it down, we hide it. That's the thing they have the most to teach us, is how to process our emotions in our bodies in the moment and let it go. We carry it our whole lives, and then we project that onto animals and think they suffer the same way. But the only reason animals suffer anywhere close to like we do is because we keep them so close to us in our insanity that we're constantly putting that on them. They actually have the opportunity to teach us how to be human again if we'll quit conditioning and using and exploiting them at the subtlest levels. So in this moment where this horse taught me that, it was over. My reality's shattered. My career is over. I'm a popular horse trainer in Texas. I have a huge following. I didn't know what to do. So I sold everything I owned. I took the little bit of money I had in savings. I chartered a huge semi-truck, and I went to meet some friends that I had met in Mount Shasta, California that were doing something similar. And I took all of my animals out into the desert. The people I went out to work with weren't quite on the same page. They were pretty self-righteous themselves, and I didn't want to be a part of the judgment because people assume that because I speak to these ideals that I come from this. And actually, I come from the opposite side of this. So I have enormous compassion for people that are still exploiting animals and harming animals, because I know that some of the best people I've ever met are the cattle ranchers that I work with, the horseback riders that truly have the best intentions, that are either ignorant, don't know, or just disconnected. And you would have never gotten me to change if you'd have made me wrong. Ever. I wouldn't have listened to any of it because I was too arrogant, too in my head, and I was successful, so why would I walk away? It took a horse and it took the truth to change me. So when I changed, I left, and I went out into the desert with my horses and lived in a tiny house off-grid for 2 years with just me and the horses. You can't shake truth that's been that rooted. I didn't have any outside opinions. I didn't have anyone telling me what I should think or what was real or what wasn't. I had these horses living with me every day with no control, giving me no problems whatsoever, not getting injured, not getting sick. I could open the gates and say, hey, come over with me, and they'd follow me. No treats, no nothing. And it's so deeply rooted now that I don't care if I die getting this message out. This is how I am, and this is the truth for me. And if you come meet my horses, you'll experience it yourself. So I'm setting up these sanctuaries to try to give people the opportunity to experientially understand what unconditional love is and what it looks like, and not use animals in their lives. Because each one of you that has an animal at home has the opportunity for a spiritual practice that is so incredible, so rooted in experience, that you don't have to pick up a book, you don't have to go to a speaker, you don't have to pay somebody, you don't have to go to a therapist. If you've got a dog, a cat, a mouse, a hamster, a horse, access to any animal that is rooted more in their presence than another human being, because I promise you there's no therapist out there that is more present than my horses at this point. It'd just be a waste of money. You have the opportunity to create space and offer true consent and true honoring and true respect that can transform your entire life. And that's what I encourage everyone to do. So I'm going to give you guys about 15 minutes to ask questions if you want. Let me check the time. And then I can sell some books if you guys are interested. Yeah.
I'd like to share an experience.
Sure.
I had an experience when I was 18 where, I was at a friend's house and they had a horse, and they asked me if I'd like to ride, and they just helped me up on the horse bareback and went riding down across this field. And I thought, oh my God, this is just an amazing experience. And then when I was 33, I had a friend who lived in a little house on the side of the road, and she had a goat and a dog, and her yard adjoined this enormous, like 80-acre spread where somebody had a horse just pastured. And we went, she like led us through the fence, and she and I and the dog and the goat and the dog went over into this pasture, and a horse came trotting up to us and was just all excited to see us. And the land was just like sloping down from the fence, and we took off running down this hill. The grass was like this high, and her little dog, about every 6 feet you'd see this dog just appear over the grass looking to see where it was, and then he'd run on, and the goat was running, and we were running, and the horse was running, and we got to the bottom of the hill, and except for the horse, we all just fell down in a heap, and the goat came over and just put its head in my lap and was like nuzzling me, and the horse was just standing there, and you could see the happiness just radiating off this horse, that we were just all playing together and nobody was being required to do anything.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to and it was just like the experience of riding the horse when I was 18 just paled in comparison
Exactly.
with this experience of just sharing space and time with all these animals and and the horse running down this field. And then we just went exploring for hours, and the horse just wandered along because it was a woods, and the horse just wandered around with us. And then eventually she just kind of wandered off, and it was just like she was doing her thing and she left. So
Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, that's what it looks like. People ask me all the time, like, if you don't ride your horses anymore, what do you do? I'm like, what do you do with your friends? I mean, and a lot of people would probably answer that in a way that would be exploitative. But I've done everything on the back of a horse you can imagine. I mean, there was nothing and I couldn't do on the back of a horse. There was no horse I couldn't train. There was no horse I couldn't ride. And I've done some amazing stuff from up there. But the things I've experienced since, like when my stallion lays down and I can curl up between his hooves and he puts his head over me and I can just bawl my eyes out and he just holds that space for me with no expectation from either of us, that's incredible. And then I can jump up and run and he runs beside me and I don't have to be afraid. There's no way in hell he's going to hurt me because he's so aware and so careful. And I have a whole herd of horses that are able to interact that way. This work applies equally to all species. It doesn't matter. It's harder with dogs and cats that you share your every moment with because it's essentially like children. It's really hard with children because then we have to watch this and make sure our language is nonviolent, which none of us even know how to speak nonviolently. I'm not even speaking nonviolently holding this microphone right now. It takes a lot of work. But it is a way to get a foundation of what it looks like and then build on that so that we actually have a chance. Because if we just run around treating symptoms all day, we're going to run out of time. So, are there any other questions? Yeah.
I'm just curious, and you might not even care. Obviously, the world in Texas is totally different than it is now, and you might not care what they think. I'm just curious if that world, they viewed you in that way. Do they know what you're doing now? Do they like your work? Do you ever get encouragement, or do you think you plant seeds with them at some point?
Well, seeds were definitely planted. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, is having to walk away from everything I knew and feel like the crazy person. Because there were definitely times in the desert where I'm like, what's wrong with me? I'm like, I could go make $1 million right now training some horses, and I'm sitting out here broke as a joke. And I have been for 4 years struggling to try to figure out, how do I turn this into something when I can't use all of the skills that I learned? Interestingly enough, in the last 6 months that my name's been out there a little bit more and videos are getting circulated, I've heard from 3 people that were in my previous circles. One was a professional trainer, and the other 2 were just kind of in the horse network back then. Say things like, you know what, Ren, we thought you were completely insane 4 years ago, but it turns out that I'm seeing what you're saying now, and thank you so much for having the courage to do that. But the trainer, especially, somebody I really had a lot of respect for, and just disappeared from my life with no explanation, and I was like, wow, that sucks. I really thought that person, I saw through this. She came to me recently, and she wants to come learn from me now and train with me, and she's working at a correctional facility, and she's applying everything that she's seen me say to these prisoners and seeing it transform their lives. And she completely stopped riding, completely stopped training, and she let me know, she was just like, some of us just aren't ready to do it yet all the way. And she has kids, which is a whole nother obstacle. I didn't have to deal with that. But, it is planting seeds for sure. So, and I'm sure my apprentice that I trained to take over my business really appreciates my insanity, because now she's making my money. So, any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick little aside. I had a horse and 2 ponies in Connecticut. The ponies I raised from birth. They were accidental breedings, other stories. And when I would go in my pasture, they would all come up, and the horse would start licking my blue jeans, and the ponies would be licking me, and Stepper, the little colt, would pull on my shoes. And I tell people, horse people, I say, it's so funny how they do that. Oh, they want the salt, they said. So, and then the other little aside is I used to ride my horse bareback. I think I was kind of crazy. So I'd go off through the hills of Connecticut, and there was a wealthy man who had what they call paneled country. And to protect it from the trail, he had a 5-foot solid fence. So I'd be riding her bareback, a pasture horse, but she never let me fall off. So I'd head her at that 5 feet, and I knew she'd either stop with me on, but she would jump a solid 5-foot fence. And I think if you stop a minute and think about what sort of injury I could have had, or who would have ever found me, but she loved me, and that's what she'd do.
And I speak to that in my book. The horses that truly feel like you care about them, they'll do anything for you. Just like we do anything for the people that we care about, even if we're being used, even if we're being exploited, even if we're being harmed, even if we're not saying yes. That's because we're all desperately seeking connection and acceptance and love. So just because they still do it for us doesn't mean it's okay. Yeah.
What is your opinion on service animals or service dogs?
Yeah.
Or training that, how would you go about something?
I speak to that in great depth in my new book that is not out yet. And my new book focuses more on dogs because it's a much broader audience and people can relate to it more. But my opinion on it is that I don't think anything that is a coping mechanism should be quit cold turkey. If it's what you use to survive or benefit from, you can't just stop it unless you have something of more value to replace it with. So I'm never going to go out and say, everyone should stop riding their horses. Everybody should stop eating meat right now. Everybody should stop using therapy animals. That would cause mass chaos and suffering. So what I am saying is we need to pay attention to this and move away from that as quickly as possible and work on becoming the humans that we need to be to take care of each other instead of using other beings and controlling them subtly and even teaching them to like our control so that it looks like they're happy in their jobs. Because animals don't need a purpose like humanity thinks we do. We don't need a purpose. Our purpose is to be. Our purpose is to breathe air. If you're alive, you have a purpose and you are worthy. If you weren't worthy of the life that you have, you wouldn't be sitting here today. Animals know that. And if we give them the opportunity to show us that and what that looks like, we can be a lot happier just with what we have. And so if it's giving somebody a benefit, I wouldn't remove it right away, but I would start looking for potential substitutions so that we're not exploiting. Yeah. Yes.
I just have one as far as dogs. Dogs that live with us, they enjoy I guess. Do you believe in command training for them to give them some sort of mental stimulation, or how would you go about stimulating them in some way?
This is where it's hard to explain in words, because unless you've experienced what's possible.
Because I wouldn't know how else to go about with my dog.
Well, with your dog, here's what I would do. For a week, stop asking anything of him. Or at least practice 10 minutes a day of no expectation, no agenda, no control, no judgment, no anything other than just giving him your undivided attention and see what organically grows from that and respond to him rather than going to him for a reason and see what happens. He's going to get real uncomfortable the first couple of times. You're probably going to get real uncomfortable the first couple of times. And after about 3 days, you're going to probably see your dog go, oh, thank God, I can just relax. And they're going to stop looking to you for everything because they feed off of our emotions big time. And I have a husky that I've done this work really successfully with that models what it is to be perfectly wild and free. And I have a 12-year-old corgi that is a total mirror of my absolute codependent emotional neediness that I've had the last decade of my life. And it's really embarrassing when people meet the two of them. And I'm like, yeah, that's who I used to be. And I love him dearly, but it sucks to see that and how he's constantly looking to make sure I'm okay and make sure that he's only okay if everything's okay. And it's torturous to them, but they're happy to do it because we condition them to be at our beck and call. So just practice doing something different and see what comes of it. I break my work down into 13 principles that make it pretty idiot-proof. It makes it where it's like, it just eliminates everything that gets in the way of the truth. But all we're really doing, it's not practicing something to do differently, it's practicing what not to do that gets in the way of unconditional love. So you still have to set boundaries, you're still making requests, you're still expressing your needs, you're still the parent at the end of the day. You're just removing judgment and you're taking responsibility for your own feelings and emotions that come up. And you're not putting those on another and you're not demanding anything from another. So, any other questions? Yeah. They are in the new book. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I do offer coaching and consulting, and that's kind of the work I do now is one-on-one with people and their animals. How do you move in this direction?
But beyond the animals, I see you say spiritual, something beyond.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the work has nothing to do with animals. I just learned it from animals, and God knows it's easier to practice this with animals than another human being in your house. So, I mean, it gives you a practice. So the only thing that's really unfortunate about this will shatter your reality. It will rip apart everything that isn't truly you. It will challenge you in every way that your ego is demanding you be anything but the truest part of yourself.
How do we become exposed to that? How could someone who's interested?
The very basic way, I mean, the 13 principles make it easier, and working with me would make it easier, but all you really need to know is never make them wrong and do no harm and honor every no. And if you can do those three things while still respecting your role as a guardian who's responsible for their basic needs and well-being, all of it will come if you can get quiet enough for answers to arise through that. Those are the only 3 rules I had, and I developed it into 13 principles to make it a little bit easier because baby talk is out. Treats, out. Everything that manipulates or controls or coerces or anything, it's out. And all you're left with is you and this animal, and that's really uncomfortable for the first few days. But then you start to feel okay with it. And let me tell you, in this space of all distractions being removed, every bit of your emotional shit is going to come up. So you either learn how to feel it all or you go get some outside help and practice some other therapies that'll help you embodily process the stuff that you've been avoiding through your pet for the last 20, 30 years. So, yes?
Hi. My name is Susan. I'm with Speak for Animals in Greenville, South Carolina. And I just want to tell you, Ren is my idol. I saw her on Facebook. How many of you have seen her on Facebook and seen any of her videos? If you have not watched her videos, your life will be changed by watching her videos. I'm sorry, Ren. I'm sorry.
My videos are embarrassing.
I think they're wonderful. She's embarrassed by them, but she's phenomenal. I'm so glad everybody got to hear her. I was thrilled when I heard she was coming. But I've got a question for you, Ren. I have, and some of you know my dog Pickle. I've got a tree over there, some folks from Greenville that know my dog Pickle. He came to me, he had been kicked severely, and he has cerebellar damage. So he walks like he's in the Third Reich. And I couldn't train him anything, even if I had ever wanted to. But I wanted to ask you this. My husband was asking me this. I do this stupid thing with him every night, where he would never come to me if I said, come here, Pickle. But if I go, Pickle, get in this house and go get in that parlor. He loves it when I give a snarky tone to him.
Does he?
And
Does he really?
I think he does. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Ren.
Do you know how many people tell me, my horse loves jumping over jumps and cavaletti?
Well, what I do when I take him in there is we go into the, I won't make a whole life story out of this, but he's not an emotional dog for me at all, but with his brain damage, I try to, to help him. It's not that he really needs any help.
Yeah.
But we do these silly things in there, and he really seems to like it. Like he jumps through he does all these stupid things that he does on his own. Is it bad for us to have like this funny
I won't go
relationship?
There. Nothing's bad to me. Nothing's wrong.
Well, I don't mean bad, but
is it working for you?
I think it's working for him. It's kind of a pain for me because it makes me stay up later and all this stuff. but he seems to really react to it. I don't know.
Well, let me check my timing.
How do I know?
Okay. How does it feel?
It feels really good, but
Then-
it's not emotional to me. It's
Well,
just doing something.
If what
fun
you're
with
doing
him.
feels good from like an honest, like healthy place, I would say keep doing it. And I don't care what that looks like. I mean, that's where we are. That's where you are.
Yeah.
If it feels okay for you, that's where you're at. Accept that. If you're pushing yourself to be somewhere you're not, you're actually going to take longer to get there.
Okay.
Like I've only been vegan for 2 years, and I didn't at all, not once, shame myself or guilt myself anytime I had a craving, because I knew I was addicted. I was doing the research. I had done all of the science. And I was just like, okay, I'm moving away from this. My commitment is to move away from this as quickly as I comfortably can. And through that, I'm definitely one of those vegans that will never go back. It's never going to be a problem for me. I'm never going to second guess it. I'm never going to wonder if I made the right choice. I take that approach to every change that I'm making in my life, and I change pretty rapidly. I mean, if you've read my book or do read my book, I've made a dramatic transformation through that radical acceptance of where I am and being okay with that. This work will give you a strength of character like nothing else I know. And so the answer is always going to be, is it working for you? Does it feel okay? Does it feel right? And if not, take some time to evaluate that. Yeah. But I will say that just because an animal seems to like something doesn't mean that we're doing the best thing that we can for them. Because, I mean, there's a lot of people that go to their 9-to-5 jobs and really seem to like that because that's what they've conditioned to believe is what we're supposed to do. And that's what has led us into the situation we're in, is people reaching for things that they think they like because we don't really know what's available to us outside of external gratification.
That's true. Thank you for saying that. I don't know if this has helped some of y'all, but it's a habit for us that we do this every night. And he goes in the bathroom and we sit there on the side of the tub and I brush him and we commune. But I think I'll try not doing it and see how he responds to that.
The main thing is honor every single no.
Okay.
Learn to recognize the subtlest no's. The subtlest no is when you go to the animal with any sort of intention and they ignore you. That's the first no. That means stop. I never ask more than 3 times because it's natural in conversation for them not to hear. Maybe they didn't understand what the request was, but you can badger a yes very quickly if you continue asking. So that's why even some of the more evolved forms of horse training I still question, because a lot of people are only using positive or praise-based horse training. But if you ask the horse 10 times, I'm going to go, fine, I'll do it at the end of the day too, because it gets annoying after a while. So never ask more than 3 times. If it's a no, let it be a no. What I've learned is if what your request is beneficial to both of you and not harmful in any way, they may say no the first time, but if you honor the no, they're most likely going to say yes the next time. And that's how I was able to teach my horse to do things that were helpful. But I had so many animals that I just let them live in sanctuary for the most part. The things that you can do if you are able to have a one-on-one relationship with the animals in your life are the sky's the limit. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talk about how do you help an animal that's destructive, a dog that has issues or has issues with going to the bathroom in the house or destructive of things? How do you live with them in that way, people that have those issues?
So when you're in the in-between stage and you haven't developed the relationship required to get the animal's full cooperation, but you've got issues and you can't go back to training because you no longer agree with that, all that you're left with is the physical environment. You can control the physical environment and create neutral physical boundaries. So a dog that's disturbed, having a lot of trouble, needs to be contained in some way. You make sure their basic needs, so their basic needs for movement, food, shelter, water, are met, and you're available in holding space for them, and you make the physical area that they have to live in safe for them and for those around them. And you start working on the relationship. It doesn't take very long. It takes way less time than any sort of rehabilitation method or training method that I ever knew previous to this. I've had really screwed up horses make a total shift in less than a day just by honoring them and them knowing and feeling that they're gonna be honored and it's gonna be upheld. I've had horses that wouldn't let people touch them immediately come in for an embrace once they know that the expectation is lifted. And we can feel that with each other too. I mean, you can feel if somebody has an agenda with you or an expectation. Animals feel that probably tenfold. So they know when you're being congruent and when you're in your authenticity and when you're just trying to manipulate them to do some nice thing. Yeah. Yes?
I was wondering if you don't mind
you don't mind speak again to how your change has affected your own certain human relationships.
I definitely lost almost everyone in my life, but that's not a bad thing. It was hard, but I changed, and the people that I had previously surrounded myself for reasons that weren't necessarily congruent to who I am and who I want to be today, they fell away. And suddenly new people started showing up that could meet me where I'm at. And it was scary because you have to have faith that you're going to create the reality that you're putting out. And there's not very much time, though, before that starts showing up if you create space for it. So now I have a partner that's worthy of this work and this level of communication and relationship. I've got friends that are showing up in that way. And everybody's starting to show up in ways that I didn't know that I was able to hold space with people like this. And it's also, most importantly, taught me how to set boundaries. I don't put up with a lot of crap anymore. So if somebody's not treating me well, I can lovingly move the other direction without feeling bad about it, which as somebody who was deeply rooted in codependency, that was really hard. I would stay in the relationship no matter what to try to learn from it, to try to stay in it, to try to be better, and constantly sell myself short in that experience, and I don't do that anymore. So, anything else? Well, if that's it, is there a place that I can take? I've got books. It's my whole story. If you guys have more questions, I'm happy to answer it. There's so many levels to this and so many layers. If you have any animal questions or just questions in general about me or what all this work implies, I'm happy to answer them.